So I was talking of internal validity of the study. We were discussing the problems that occur when we say that internal validity of the study is poor. Means there are some errors that went ahead with the methodology of the study. So either you could not do the way you had planned the study design was not proper, you could not implement the way, you did not complete the sample size, or there were a lot of dropouts in the study. So that is a threat to the data that you have generated. So you wanted to prove that this drug is effective in diabetes mellitus. However, you could not prove that this drug is effective because of lot of loss to follow up, because of lot of errors that happened. You could not record the study results properly. So all this is internal validity of the study. So you may start with a good research question, but if you haven't done your things properly while conducting the research, then there is a threat to the internal validity, and there is the data that you have generated now stands no more. You cannot conclude with the data that this drug is effective in diabetes mellitus. Take a second example of external validity. So what is external validity? So one thing is how you have carried out the study, which we discussed is internal validity. The second thing is whenever you want to do a study, for example, I want to prove that this new drug is effective in diabetes mellitus. When you carry out the study, you found it is effective in diabetes. Okay, so it decrease the blood glucose of the participants that participated in your study. Now, what is the interest of the researcher? The interest of the researcher is not in proving that this drug is effective in that 30 patients you tested. What is the overall approach of the researcher? The researcher does not want to say कि ये drug effective है only in this 30 patients. The interest of the researcher is much beyond the sample. So he wants to say that this drug will be effective in all patients of diabetes mellitus. That is the generalizability of the study results. That is, you always carry out a study to prove that it is effective in that particular population. You do not want to say that this is effective only in that sample that you have chosen. So that is the external validity. How good you can generalize your result to the population. And remember, researcher may start with a sample, but the area of his interest is always population. The pharma companies who develop drugs, they do not develop for sample. They prove it in a sample and they say that this drug is going to be effective in all patients suffering from this kind of disease. So that is the external validity. So you have to maintain both internal validity and external validity when you are doing a particular study. Okay, so we will not go into details of internal validity. So let's go ahead with what are the different types of study designs that you can see. Okay, so clinical trials, broadly you can divide any type of study as experimental or observational type of study. Experimental, we will discuss here randomized clinical trial today. You can do other variants of this type. The other broad study design that you can choose is observational study design. And in the observational, you have again subtypes, that is analytical and descriptive type of study designs. Analytical, you have case control studies and cohort studies. And in descriptive type, you have case reports, case series, and cross-sectional studies. So we will discuss each one of them, and you will come to know which type of study or research question will demand which type of study design. So coming to the lowest, before we go ahead with observational studies, this is a good question to ask. Why do an observational study at all when everybody is saying that RCTs, that is randomized controlled trials, are gold standards? So if that is a gold standard, why not everybody, all of us, just carry out randomized controlled trial? This is a tricky question actually. So RCTs or randomized controlled trials require a lot of resources also to carry out, a lot of training of the personnel, lot of money is invested when you are doing an RCT vis-a-vis observational studies, which can be done in a lower resource setting also. And another thing, where a good study is published in 2014, which says So the title of the study is Healthcare Outcomes Assessed with Observational Study versus Randomized Trial. So is the outcome or whatever you want to study, is it different when you do it in an observational way vis-a-vis a randomized trial way? So it says there's a little evidence that the result that you show, significant effect estimate difference is result that you show is different between observational studies and RCTs. So if you plan a good study, be it observational or RCTs, the yield of the study will be similar in observational and RCTs. So you can carry out an observational studies also. So coming to this type of studies that we saw. So the first type we saw was descriptive trials, in which were case reports, case series, cross-sectional studies. They are extremely good for hypothesis generation. That is, they will generate a hypothesis. For example, if I publish a case report of I give a drug tomorrow, and I see a adverse effect which has not been reported at all. Okay, I look up the literature, I see, oh, this is not reported. So I plan to publish it as a case report. That is, I feel that this should be known to the world. So what I do, I take the details of the patient, and I then take the details of the adverse effect and how have I managed that adverse effect, and I publish it as a case report. So that is a hypothesis generation. It is for other readers or researchers to now study whether that particular adverse effect was due to the drug, and whether, you know, there is a causal relation, or the cause of that particular adverse effect was that drug only. So it will just give you hypothesis. This type of studies, you have to confirm the hypothesis using the below type of studies, that is analytical type of studies. So I'll do an observational trial, or maybe I will select many patients who are taking that type of drug, and then I will see whether I'll follow them for that particular adverse effect. So that is observational trials. Or experimental trials, I will prescribe or give the drugs to the particular patient, and in a controlled manner see whether there are adverse effects. That is, you can also do it in an experimental way or interventional way. So we will go ahead and discuss the first type, that is descriptive trials. Okay, case report. What is a case report? It is unusual disease or occurrence of one or of more than one condition. That is, you can either publish something which is new, which has not been seen by many people or has not been known in the medical literature. So those type of diseases of unusual symptom and unusual occurrence of a particular thing, or unusual surgery that you have done and the outcome is different. And for example, I said unusual adverse effect which has not been reported earlier. So all this type of things can go as case report. Case series, when you do multiple such things, like many cases when you publish. So one, if I publish regarding one patient, then it is case report. If I'm seeing 5 patients and the outcome is, I want to report this, then it is case series. Okay, so case report is usually one patient, whereas case series is multiple patients. So why publish a case report? So I found this slide which says case report may be the beginning of a glorious and successful career in medical writing. So it is very important to publish when you, at least especially when you are in academics and even outside when you go, publications have a lot of value. So there is a very famous saying, publish or perish. So it says you have to publish or else you will lag behind others and you may not get opportunities that you would want, maybe scholarships or going outside, whatever. So all this has become very important. Publications have been very important. So I either publish or perish, or publish and prosper. So case reports, you will see many clinicians publishing case reports, and it may be a beginning of medical writing, as somebody has written. So, and you may go on to do more important studies like observational. So proving the hypothesis which is generated by the case reports may be the next step. This is very good things that we should know, that first case of HIV was published as a case report. So it is not that, you know, case report are not important at all. Okay, so the first time the world knew about HIV/AIDS was through a case report, which read a case report of disseminated Kaposi sarcoma in a young homosexual man. So this is such an important or a landmark paper which talks about every word. If you see, it is so important. Disseminated Kaposi sarcoma. So this is an opportunistic infection which is not seen generally in people. So occurrence of this type of thing in a particular young patient where he is not immunocompromised is such an opportunistic infection you would not expect in a young homosexual man. Again, that is a risk factor for developing that particular disease. So it was first described in this population, and then we came to know that this is a particular type of disease where there is immune dysfunction and all that. So such important things may be published as a case report initially, and you may go on to prove it later on. Even this type of progressive multifocal leukoencephalopathy following natalizumab treatment. So this adverse effect is so rare that at the time of development, even if 1,000 patients were tested, and if the adverse effect is 1 in 1 lakh, it is so rare in occurrence, then you will miss that adverse effect. Okay, so if it is 1 in 10,000, the incidence of the adverse effect is so rare, then even if 1,000 patients are tested at the time of drug development, you're likely to miss these adverse events. So these adverse events can only come up when you publish them later as a case report. So find many publications came after natalizumab was approved. And it was found that many clinicians are not reporting this adverse effect. And then it was tested and it was found that there is a causal effect, and then it has started coming up in the textbooks. So then later on the textbooks get updated that these are the added adverse effects of the drug. Now, what is the advantage of reporting this type of adverse effect is that clinicians will look for this adverse effects or can identify them earlier, or at least, or in few cases, you can not give the drug in patients who are at risk factor for a particular adverse effect. So if you know that this drug can cause fulminant hepatic failure, then once a patient develops fulminant hepatic failure, it is fatal. So what you can do is you may withhold a drug if the patient is having a raising liver function test. So you may avoid a particular adverse effect if you can identify or if you know that adverse effect is likely to occur, okay, or the adverse effect is known to occur with this drug. Then in that case also, you will keep a watch on the patient and maybe monitor his lab function tests and not give drugs or withhold drugs when you feel that adverse effects may be fatal. Yeah, so do you mind if I take a few pictures, Bill? I would like to publish a case report on this one. Okay, so we go ahead with the second type of, so we discussed case report and case series, and we looked at how important they can be landmark papers also. So coming to the next type, in the descriptive itself, that is cross-sectional studies. So what is cross-sectional studies? They begin with a study population. And you do what? You measure all the variables on a participant at some point of time. So suppose you want to understand what is the incidence of, say, road traffic accidents. So you want to know how much is it prevalent? How much is it there in the society? So how much is the prevalence of any particular disease you can take up? Okay. So what will you do so suppose I start the study today, I will look up all the hospitals, I will look up everywhere, wherever are the probable places where I will get a record of the road traffic accidents, and I will record out of so many people, so many is this is the burden of road traffic accident. That is, so many patients are suffering or they get hit by this RTA, road traffic accident. So this will tell me what are the variables on that particular participant. So it measures prevalence of the disease, not the incidence. Incidence means new cases, because you are not looking up for an entire point of time. You're at one particular point of time, you're looking at one particular point of time. You want to know what is the burden of this particular disease. But the new cases keep on adding. Even if my studies over, the new cases will keep on adding. So the new cases are not being investigated here. You just will know how many, at a point of time, how many patients are suffering from that particular disease. So it will give you disease and exposure at that particular time only. So it is also called as snapshot in time, because it will tell you today how much is the burden. It will not tell you how many new cases have been added or what has happened. So these type of things will not be told in cross-sectional studies. What are the disadvantages of this particular study? Subject selection. So how have you selected your subjects? How have you gone about whether I have, if I want to study road traffic accident, have I gone to all the probable places where these people can be can go? There could be mild injuries where, you know, patient can go home, so I may miss few of them. So how have you selected your subject? It may be very difficult sometimes to actually get a prevalence, whole prevalence of the disease, because it is not possible for selecting all probable sites where you will get these type of patients. There may be some response bias, participation bias. So patients, if you want to know more about it, suppose I want to know the severity of a particular liver disease, then it is possible that there is some bias in the form of lot of patients may not have the current LFT values. I may not find all the patients who are suffering from this type of disease. So there could be a lot of bias. There could be a lot of subject selection biases can occur. So these are the problems that are associated with cross-sectional studies, and therefore the evidence that is generated with this type of studies may not be applicable, or may not be are at a lesser in that pyramid of evidence. When you say RCT is at the top, the cross-sectional studies are relatively lower in the bottom because of the bias that it can generate. Okay, so if you want to know how severe is disease among rheumatoid arthritis patients attending a tertiary care hospital, suppose I've selected a tertiary care hospital like KEM, and I want to know कि rheumatoid arthritis patient कितने severe हैं. Okay, so I will go maybe in a month, OPD I will attend, and I will take all the patients of rheumatoid arthritis coming in that month. Okay, because that is my study duration, and look at their severity. So the one who's coming, who has come before that, the one who's coming after that, I will miss all those patients because it is a snapshot in time. So only till the study duration, that data you will get. You're not following up the patient. Tomorrow, that particular patient today, who he's mild, tomorrow he may turn severe, but I'm not looking at that because I'm not meeting him at all. So I'm meeting a patient only once. So if, in that particular study duration, I'm meeting him only once. So that is a cross-sectional design, where you meet the patient once, you don't follow up the patient, and you will only get the severity at that particular point of time. So it's a good way of showing things. Like cross-sectional is the vertical thing. You see people, I have taken these people. Yeah, there's 3 standing in line. Whereas if I follow this patients, this is longitudinal design, where this patient I'm following up after a month, another month, another month. So I know the profile now. I know that she's mild today, but severe tomorrow, or she's severe today, but then maybe her disease is reversed. So all that. So all that you will come to know if you have followed up the patient. The idea of doing a descriptive study is, it is simple and inexpensive. So most of our postgraduate thesis, if you look at most of our KEM postgraduate thesis, they are all cross-sectional studies because it is simple to do. It is inexpensive, so you don't have to follow up, or you don't so at your convenience you go, you collect the data, you come back again. Tomorrow I have my night, so I can't go in the morning. I drop that day, again next day I go. So it is the way you want to do it. So it is simple, it is inexpensive. Do not have the power to establish cause-effect relationship. So I cannot with this evidence say that, you know, this drug like hydroxychloroquine, which was started in patients, it has got a good effect, or the patients have reversed, or it is very effective, or methotrexate is excellent in rheumatoid arthritis. This kind of cause effect, that is, methotrexate is a drug and the effect is that the disease is reversed. So this type of cause effect relationship you cannot make when you are doing a cross-sectional study. However, again, as discussed earlier, these type of studies are useful for generating hypothesis, and you have to test this hypothesis later on with analytical type of studies using uh, other studies that we will discuss now. Okay, so we go ahead with analytical type of studies, that is observational studies, which relate association and cause. Okay. So the first type here is cohort study, which goes forward from exposure to the outcome. It can be prospective as well as retrospective, but the ideal cohort study is always prospective. So if nothing is written ahead of cohort study, it always means it is prospective study. For retrospective study, a word will be mentioned, retrospective cohort study, because retrospective is not the ideal design of a cohort study. Cohort study is always prospective. It goes ahead in time. So we will discuss what is ahead in time. What do you mean by cohort study? So you take a target population. I'll give you an example over here. Exposed and not exposed. So what is exposed and not exposed? It can be any exposure. For example, it depends on what you want to prove. So very common example given over here is smoking and lung cancer. Okay, so smoking is exposure and lung cancer is the outcome or disease. Okay, so when you want to prove that smoking causes lung cancer, here you always say smoking is associated with lung cancer. That is, there is some association or there is a cause-effect relationship. Then you use cohort design. So you will take patients who are exposed and not exposed. That means you will take smokers and non-smokers. And amongst the smokers, you will see how many have developed disease, that is lung cancer, and how many have not developed the disease or remain disease-free. Similarly, again, you take a group of non-smokers. Here also, you follow them up and you look for how many of them have developed disease, that is lung cancer, and how many are disease-free. Now, this is when from exposure to disease. This could be a very long time when you have to follow up the patient for a particular disease. Okay, so the slide may look busy, but just concentrate on the arrow and what I'm explaining. So as explained, you will take exposure, not exposure. So if I feel obesity can cause heart diseases, so this is my hypothesis. So obesity is associated with heart diseases. So what do I do in cohort study? I take obese people and I take non-obese people or lean people. Okay, so this is exposure group and this is not exposed group. Then I follow them over time. Okay, so it could be 10 years, it could be 20 years, because not obesity over a period of time will cause harmful effects. Okay, so and in this group I see amongst obese how many have developed heart disease, whereas in lean patients or lean people, how many of them have developed heart disease. Okay, so this is prospective design. Now how do you do a retrospective cohort then? So you have an idea. Okay, you have a cohort or you have an idea which says that this particular, suppose this is only my research question, whether tire manufacturing workers versus desk employees, whether a particular cancer is more in tire manufacturing workers because they are exposed to certain type of chemicals. So if that is my research question, I want to prove that tire manufacturing workers are more prone to bladder cancer. So what do? I take the exposed group, that is tire manufacturing workers and desk employees, and I follow them over a period of time and see how many of them have developed cancer in both the groups. But this is one way of doing it prospectively. What is retrospective? So here I have had this research question somewhere here. That is after I feel that, I have seen few cases where patients are coming with bladder cancer, and if I've taken a history, they tell me I was working in that tire manufacturing company. So what do? Now these patients have developed an outcome. Okay, so I go back in time. I take records of, now here when you want to do the study, you have to have very good data. Data must be there in the form of either a well kept or well stored database should be there, either hard or soft. So you should have an access to that data. So you go back in time 20 years. So now this is 2000 to 2020. You go back in time into 2010 or maybe even before that, and you take a list of people who are working as a tire manufacturing workers, and you, in the same company, you can take desk employees because you have the data there only. So you can take the same company desk employees who are not exposed to the tire manufacturing chemicals. Now I take those people and I find out where are they now and what is their outcome today. So I trace all of them today and I see how many of them have developed bladder cancer. This is one other way of doing it. So the time lost is here is very less, isn't it? So maybe few of them have not yet developed the bladder cancer, but I can follow them up. I can follow them up from today 10 years. So the total exposure they would have had is around 20 years of tire manufacturing workers they are, and what is their outcome. So you can the basic difference between prospective and retrospective here is prospective, when you choose them in the study, they are not having outcome. Okay, you choose them only on the basis of the exposure, which is either obese and lean, like this. Okay, none of them have heart disease. If they have heart disease, you will not take that patient in your study. Okay, so you have to take the characteristic patients with a particular characteristic not having the outcome in your study. Whereas in a retrospective design, you can take some of your patients will have the outcome, may have the outcome today, and some of them will develop over a period of time and you will follow them up over a period of time. Yes, so that is a basic difference between prospective and retrospective. If you have any doubt, I can again clarify at the end of the, you can write it down. So trauma, if I want to prove trauma during adolescence is associated with the risk of anxiety disorder, this is a good question to answer with a cohort study. Okay, so take all the patients or all the adolescents with trauma in one group and same age, gender matched adolescents who have not experienced trauma in another group as controls, and you follow them up over a period of time, maybe 5 years, 10 years, and see how many have developed anxiety disorder. So this type of a question is very good and is very good to answer using a cohort study. Before we go ahead, can one of you unmute and speak advantages of doing a cohort study with whatever you have understood? Or disadvantage?
You find the risk factors for the progression or the inciting event for any diseases.
Who's speaking?
Ma'am Kaustubh.
Kaustubh, okay. So you find the risk factors of, so that is why you're doing the study, whether to know that whether this risk factor is associated with the disease. Yes, right. Anything else?
We can find a association or a causal analysis.
Yeah, we can find a
causal analysis or association between the factors.
Good, very good. So it will definitely tell us कि ये associated है कि नहीं है. You can either accept or refute hypothesis. That is, you can say yes, lung cancer and smoking are associated, or you can refute the hypothesis saying no, smoking and lung cancer are not associated. Yes, so it will definitely tell you causal effect है या नहीं है. Exactly. Good. Anything else? Yes.
Ma'am, it would provide a better evidence as compared to a cross-sectional study. As cross-sectional study, there might be associations which could be found out, but when later they are followed up for many years, that association may just dissolve during a cohort study. Like there have been many cases where associations have been found in cross-section, but they have been rejected in cohort studies.
Yes, right. So you can reject the hypothesis also. They are powerful study designs. Yeah, it's very powerful study design. If you do it properly, you can definitely accept or refute your hypothesis. So if you're doing it properly, that is exposure precedes the outcome, then it is a very powerful study design. It enables you to calculate many things. First is the incidence. So you may not know the incidence, but a cohort study may tell you why, how. If you are taking a very large number of in a cohort study, that is, you take 1 lakh people, there are very large cohort studies also, 1 lakh people if you have taken, then you can actually calculate the incidence, which that is, it will tell you what is the incidence of anxiety disorder in adolescents. So that type of question can also be, incidence means new cases, how many new cases are there in a particular age group that you are doing. Suppose you are doing that study only, which I mentioned, trauma during adolescence. So you can actually give a incidence rate later on, say that out of 1 lakh, so the anxiety disorder incidence is 100 on 1 lakh. So this type of data is generated only in a cohort study. It will tell you how many new cases are added to the pool of patients that you are studying. So you can, if you have taken a very large sample, like say 10,000 or more than that, then you can almost accurately calculate the incidence rate. It will tell you relative risk. We will discuss a relative risk in a little while. But before that, we'll take the next point, useful in exploring multiple outcomes in exposed. That is, we just discussed smoking and lung cancer. There could be other things which we do not know. Okay, for example, lung cancer can also be associated with people who have some kind of who are having more exposure of upper respiratory tract infection or lower respiratory tract infection. So this type of data you're just collecting, but you're not hypothesizing at the time of inception of the studies, because your focus is on smoking, but you record many things in your record form. So you record a lot of things, and later on you come to know, okay, this factor is also associated, this factor is also associated. So people with lower respiratory tract infection have a higher risk of developing lung cancer. Female sex have a higher risk of developing lung cancer. So this type of other outcome, other exposures and outcome, you can associate if you have done a good data collection, and you can also associate other factors that you have recorded in your record form. So it will tell you multiple outcome, whether it is associated with the multiple exposures, whether it is associated with the outcome, or it will tell you if there are multiple outcomes also to the exposure. For example, smokers, it is said that Alzheimer's or other diseases are common. So those type of diseases, if you have recorded, then even those type of outcomes you can publish. Okay, sorry. Disadvantages, can somebody speak?
Time and availability of data.
Yes.
Availability of data is a very big issue actually.
Yes. Yes.
Because gathering that cohort itself and following them up is a big task.
Yes, excellent. So to follow up so many patients requires a lot of time, manpower, money, everything. So and still there could be some patients who may just be lost to follow because they have changed their address, because they have died, because of many other things, you don't know. So it is in fact I read somewhere that cohort studies may sometimes they may outlive the researcher's life also. So even the researchers, few of them are not there, but the study continues. So it is quite possible, because if they're very long studies where because cancers and other things, they don't happen quickly. Okay, so they take very long time. So to assess all those outcomes sometimes may take really very, very long time. So it is time consuming, it is expensive, it is lost to follow up could be there could be long follow-ups. Changes in subject characteristics could be there. For example, today he's a smoker, he might quit smoking, and then he's of no use to you because you had taken him as a case, and now, I mean, then there's no point in following him up, because there will be some amount of exposure that will be required to record the outcome. Coming to the next type, which is much easier to do, is case control. And we find that some of our postgraduate students' thesis are on case control studies. So this is good to do because this takes lesser time. So it begins with cases, that is people with a disease. We start and we go backward from the disease to the risk factor. So it is just the opposite. You take patients, I'll explain when we come to the diagram. So you take patients who are at the risk, who have developed a disease, and then you inquire or you look at their records for assessing the outcome, the exposure, for assessing the exposure. So how do we do this? So just the opposite, as you, if you can recollect what we took in our cohort study. So here you to take the disease, take the people who do not have disease. First example could be, again, we can take the smoking and lung cancer example, just the opposite way you will do it. We'll take patients with lung cancer, which you will cause cases. controls will be patients with all other same. That is, you will match them for age, you will match them for gender, you will match them for any other factor you think is important, but they will not have lung cancer. The only difference would be they would not have lung cancer. Then in disease group, you would inquire, or if there is a particular data, if it is available in record, you will access the records and find out how many were smokers and how many were non-smokers. Similarly, in control group, you would find out how many were smokers and how many were non-smokers. Yeah. So this is usually through inquiry, through records, and etc. So with this, you get the details of exposure. Okay. So does children's inhalation of hairspray facilitates development of asthma? If you want to do this, it's very well you can do it with a case control design where children with asthma, children without asthma, and particular hairspray or exposure to a particular, you can take anything which you feel, other pollutants, if there is a possibility of recording a particular type of pollutant that you feel. So all that can be done in a case control studies. Okay, children with asthma, without asthma, you inquire hairspray use and record them as exposure yes, no exposure, exposure yes, no exposure. Okay, in both the groups.
Ma'am, Ansh has a doubt.
Yeah, Ansh.
Ma'am, regarding with the retrospective cohort studies, so what is the difference between retrospective cohort studies and case
control studies? That's a good question. That's a good question. So in a retrospective cohort study, what you do is the outcome of interest may have occurred. For example, as we went, I'll just go back to that slide. Yeah. So the outcome of interest could have been occurred in few patients. Okay. But still, you go back in retrospect and you find out this exposure and you follow them up another 10 years. So you follow them up again, because outcome of interest is not occurred in all patients. Okay. That is your hypothesis, but you follow them again for a long duration to see how many of these exposed have developed the outcome. Whereas, and while taking the patients, you never take from here. You always take the patients from here in a retrospective cohort. Okay, you take from exposure. So the exposure is your case group, controls are your non-exposures, and then you assess the outcome. Okay, you may have started the study here. Okay, but still, what happens is you group them as exposure and not exposure, and you follow them again in time, ahead of time, say another 5 years and 10 years, to complete the number of how many outcomes have occurred. Whereas in a case control design, you take the patients at disease only. Okay, you take the patients after the outcome of interest has completely occurred in that group. So all 50 patients will have lung cancer over here. All 50 patients that are taken controls will not have lung cancer. And then you inquire about the exposure and not non-exposure. Okay, so some amount of time in retrospective cohort will be always there where you are following the patient prospectively. The entire thing will not be like a case control design. Okay, does that answer your question? Have you understood, Ansh?
So basically, even if you are saying that it's a retrospective cohort study, even then there's some amount of prospective study involved, whereas in case control it's entirely in the past.
Yes, yes, correct.
Thank you, ma'am.
So, any disadvantage of case control?
Recall bias.
Yeah, what is recall bias? Good.
The patient might not be able to recall exactly what he had done, or like he may just say कि ऐसा कुछ हुआ होगा but मुझे याद नहीं.
Okay, okay, correct. So in whom it occurs, you know, it occurs in patients who are controls. Why? Because the ones who are cases now who have developed the disease will very well connect their disease with the exposure. They will think about it and they correctly will tell you कि मैं इतने साल से smoke करता था, मैं इतना पीता. This history will be given very nicely by cases, but controls, since they are not associating it with anything and they have not developed the disease at all, they will not tell you the exposure history correctly. okay, or because they have not very this thing about it, they have not thought about it. They are so in many cases for other exposure, like for this was for smoking, but for other exposures they might forget also, okay, because they are not linking it with anything. Whereas cases, they are linking it with their disease, and therefore they will be able to tell you much nicely their exposure history vis-a-vis a control who will not be able to tell you the exposure history correctly. The first thing is selection of cases and controls itself is very difficult in case control studies. Whom to call case and whom to call control should be very explicitly defined in the protocol. So when you are saying lung cancer, you have to have very nicely, you have to think about all the factors that come to your mind, which you can describe to the case. So you should have a confirmed diagnosis, what stage of you want, what pathological grading you want. So all that should be correctly stated in your protocol when you're defining a case. Similarly, when you're defining a control, you should have a explicit definition of the control where you will match it with the case in every manner. You will try to match it, like you will take the same gender, you will take the same age as that of the case, and you will, the only difference that two should have is the cases is having the disease in question and the control does not have the disease in question. So it is difficult assuring comparability of cases and control, which is required. Matching is a process where you match every case with the control. So you may take the cases first, and then depending on your cases, you will choose controls from the population, because controls you have a wide option to choose. So you will choose the controls and you will match it to every patient, okay, every case that you have taken, so that the other factors, like if you have taken very young controls versus very old cases, then the chances, then the exposure will be different in both the groups. Then you cannot compare the two groups, okay. So you should be able to compare the two groups in terms of exposure. For that, everything else needs to be same, which you feel may differ. So you have to there control those things by matching them with respect to age. Other risk factors also sometimes people match, so you have to match them. As somebody said, they are prone for selection information bias. They will not tell you. For rare diseases, in fact, it is good. I mean, for rare diseases, you cannot do a cohort study, because it is possible that you have followed some 1,000 patients who are exposed and none of them develops a disease in question. So that is quite possible in a cohort study. So for a rare disease, nobody will do a cohort study. You will always do a case control study. So case control studies are much better for rare diseases, because you can take patients of rare diseases and patients who are not having the disease in question and then look for their exposure. So this is actually good for patients who are that is, in case control study, you can study rare diseases. Okay, this is just to lighten the mood. So, but control group can make you crazy in a case control design. You have to choose your cases and control. So look up a good case control study and read it up and look at the matching section and see how they have matched the two groups. That's a very good read for the one who wants to know more about case control study. Okay, so this we have discussed. Just a quick recap. Ideally, cohorts are prospective, case controls are retrospective. Cohort, higher cost is involved. Case control, relatively lower cost is involved. Cohort, large sample size. Case control, small sample. Case control will give you odds ratio and cohort will give you relative risk. This we are going to discuss in few slides. Case control, the design says effect and you move to the cause, whereas cohort says cause and then you move to the effect. Okay, so because there is relatively less bias in cohort study, because you are moving from cause to effect and there's no control of the researcher over the effect. The researcher cannot control the effect, whereas researcher can, if he is biased, he can change the exposure history. So that is in the hands of researcher, whereas cohort mein kya hoga, kal outcome kya hoga, that nobody can predict now. Therefore, when it comes to bias, case control studies have a higher bias as compared to cohort studies, which are more powerful study designs and they have lesser bias. So we'll find out what is this. Measures of association. One is relative risk and the other is odds ratio. Relative risk is how much an exposure increases with the risk of the disease, whereas odds ratio is odds of finding exposure in person who has disease. We'll explain this with the help of an example of this Russian salad and food poisoning. Okay, so we have done a kind of cohort study. We looked at people who have had a type of food, and then we go prospectively, that is ahead of time, and find out how many people develop food poisoning. Okay? So this is also cohort because you have started with an exposure and then you look at the outcome. So even if you have given a drug and you're looking for an adverse effect, that is also a cohort design, because you start with an exposure and you end with an outcome. Okay, so wherever that starting point is exposure and the end point is the outcome, it is a cohort design. Okay, so but the thing here is exposure and not exposure. Ye do group ka, you have to take these two groups and compare the outcome in the two groups. This you have to do. So we want to know what is the relative risk. Relative risk is how much an exposure increases the risk of the disease. So this exposure, how much the exposure of a particular salad has increased the risk of developing food poisoning. So how do we do that? So A upon A plus B, which is this is cell A, this is B. So A upon A plus B, that is how many people have developed food poisoning and have taken Russian salad, and how many people have in total taken Russian salad. So this is risk of developing a particular food poisoning in the whole of the exposed group. Okay, so A upon A plus B. Whereas what is this is divided by C upon C plus D, which is the risk of or risk of developing an outcome divided by risk of people who are not exposed. Okay, so C upon C plus D. So if you do this, relative risk is 6.67. So what do you conclude when you get a relative risk of 6.67? It says that you are 6 times more likely, or there is a risk of 6 times more likely to develop food poisoning if you have eaten a Russian salad versus one who have not eaten a Russian salad. Okay, so it effectively gives a how many times, what is the risk? What is the risk of developing a particular disease? So it will, this number itself will tell you, and you can interpret with the number. You can calculate, if you put this data in a software, it will give you a chi-square test. If you apply, it will give you whether there is a significant association, which tells you, yes, the people who are eating Russian salad have a significantly increased chance of developing food poisoning versus those who have not eaten Russian salad. Okay, so this is the interpretation of relative risk. I told you how many times, what is the times risk. Whereas a chi-square test, if you apply statistically, it will tell you how much is the significance. Means significance in the sense that what is the chance that this is not occur randomly, and there is definitely exposure has caused this and chance has not caused this. Okay, there is a chance factor also. By chance ho gaya. So that is not the case. So if it is significant, it will tell you that it is not by chance and there is association between Russian salad and food poisoning. Okay. So incidence of outcome with exposure upon incidence of outcome without exposure. So if it is more than 1, definitely there is an increased risk of outcome. If it is 1, exactly 1, no risk of outcome is there. If it is less than 1, it is protective. Okay, so you can test for protection also. Okay, for example, whether a particular type of diet reduces the occurrence of heart disease. So this can also be tested. Okay, so then the relative risk might come lesser than 1 over here, which means that this exposure is protective. Okay, so if it is lesser than 1, it tells you that there is a reduced risk of outcome in the exposed, or the exposed people are having some kind of protection and they do not develop the outcome. Yes. So we are you with me? I'll just complete the odds ratio also, and then maybe if you have any doubt, you can interrupt me. So here we come to the next this thing. So I've taken this example deliberately. So 200 students appeared for exam, only 90 passed and 10 failed. So I want to investigate why many students have failed. And now, as a teacher would do, I would expect that maybe because they're not attending the lecture. Maybe that is one reason, and that is why I want to now do a case controlled study and want to know whether the absenteeism from lecture is one of the risk factors for developing the outcome, which is failure. Okay, so I draw this 2x2 chart. So this is easy for me because I have the attendance, I have the students who have failed, everything. So I divide them into two columns, that is failed in exam, passed in exam. This is my outcome. The exposure is absenteeism from lecture or not absenteeism from lecture, that is present for lecture. Then I draw this 2x2 table, and now this here, what is the difference between the table that we have drawn here and here? Can anybody just quickly unmute and speak? This table or this table में क्या फर्क है? Basic.
And the columns and rows, outcome and exposure have been exchanged. Okay. 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 If you just see over here, both the things have occurred. ठीक है? Failure भी हो चुका है और absenteeism from lecture. Everything is हो चुका है सब. Outcome भी हो चुका है, exposure भी हो चुका है. But if you look at here, look at this table, the outcome has occurred in front of you. Okay, you started with an exposure. So this is incidence. Our incidence and outcome and exposure एक ही time पे नहीं है. Okay, exposure पहले था. You followed the patient and you found out the outcome. So outcome is actually the new case or an incidence. So here you can calculate something called as relative risk because this is incidence of that disease or new diseases that have occurred because of the exposure. Whereas here both have already occurred. Okay. So here you cannot calculate a relative risk. What you calculate is an odds ratio. And how do you do that? So, okay, if you forget this one, it is the first thing you will see is this. Okay. Who have failed in exams. So I say the odds of failing in the exam for absent students. What is the odds of failing in exam for an absent student is A upon C. It is A upon C. Whereas what is the odds of passing an exam when you have passing the exam in those who are absent versus present? So that is B upon D, isn't it? So odds of failing an exam for those students who are present, absent and present is A upon C, and odds of passing the exam for those students who are absent versus present is B upon D. So if you do A upon C divided by B upon D, the things will reverse and you will get AD upon BC. Okay. So if you do this AD upon BC, I have got 80. So it's a very high number. Maybe this chart was developed by a teacher. So it says that students not attending lecture have 80 times more chances, that odds of failure in exam due to absenteeism is around 80 times. It says 80 times chances of failing in exam than those who attend the lecture. Okay. So this is a good example of telling you how you think about and what do you mean by odds ratio. Okay, you cannot, because you don't have incidence over here, you cannot calculate a relative risk. What you calculate is what is the odd of developing a particular, of having a particular exposure in the people who have the outcome divided by the odds of developing a particular outcome in the people who are exposed to a particular, exposed versus non-exposed. So this is odds ratio. Yes. So odds of developing an outcome versus odds of not developing a particular outcome. Is there any doubt? I can just clarify now. Otherwise, I'll go ahead. Yeah. So I guess you have understood. If there's anything, you can interrupt me later on also. That's not a problem. Okay. Observation studies, the point here is that limitations are chance or bias. We discussed this. There could be selection bias, how you choose a case, how you choose a control. There could be recall biases in terms of or information giving of the participant may change if he's a case, may change if he's a control.
there could be confounding factors. Okay, there could be other factors also which are important. For example, if I say that lung cancer is associated with smoking, there could be other things which I don't know would be associated. Okay, and those may be confounders. For example, there could be other factors also. For example, lower socioeconomic status, people of lower socioeconomic status, or who are living in a more pollutant area, they may have a higher chance of lung cancer, and it is possible that you have recruited them more as a control. Then even that group will show an elevated lung cancer because you have taken them as a control, and you didn't know that they are living in that particular zone where there is a chemical industry bajume, and they have a higher chance of developing lung cancer. This is possible. So that is a confounding, because in the end, beginning of the study, when you were choosing your controls, you did not know that these patients are living in a particular area and therefore are having a higher chance of developing lung cancer. This is confounding factors. Some of the confounding factors, if you know, you will remove, but if you don't know, you may not remove them. Okay. So which is following study design allows calculation of odds ratio? What is the answer? One of you unmute.
Yes.
Case control study. Or yes, case control study. What will you get in a cross-sectional study?
You can just get the prevalence, and
you'll get a prevalence.
Ma'am, can we use chi-square in a cross-sectional study as well?
If you have a particular outcome, like we are studying rheumatoid arthritis, and then if you have severe, mild, moderate, you can compare severe versus moderate. You can compare their age. So other exposure, other factors can be compared. So you can that time do a chi-square test if you have groups. So if you feel severe and moderate is an outcome, and you compare it with some kind of exposure, other exposures, like what drug was given.
Right.
So that type of chi-square test can be. If you can draw a 2x2 table, you can apply a chi-square test. Cohort study.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. Okay. Cohort study, you will calculate. We discussed. You will calculate a relative risk, and it's more a stronger design. Now, what we haven't discussed now is RCTs, and we'll go straight to RCTs. Okay, we'll just go ahead. Case studies I had kept, but I think we are ahead of time, so we'll quickly go to the interventional studies. Okay. Okay, we'll start from a little about history, and then we can go ahead. The first clinical trial is dated back up to 1747, when James Lind carried out a clinical trial on scurvy. And what he did was, he thought that it is related to its deficiency of vitamin C. So he gave a vitamin C extract to few people, and he didn't give it to others. And it was kind of a clinical trial that he conducted, and he found that patients who were given the drug improved. So this is dated as old as 1747, and then few studies which are reported or which we have seen is 1931. A study was published, which was kind of first randomized trial to be published, where a drug was seen versus placebo for tuberculosis, and this is an just an abstract of that paper. So he said, how did he randomize to this drug or placebo? And he had written a flip of a coin. One group became identified as group 1 and the other group as group 2. So whatever crude method they could use, they did. But they thought that, a researcher bias can be there while doing the study. And it is possible that if you have some bias towards your drug, what you're likely to do is you may take patients who are likely to improve in your study drug arm, and you will put the patients on placebo if you feel these patients are not likely to recover. So that type of bias it is unknowing also. So many times your feeling for the subject is so strong that the researcher bias just comes in without even noticing. So to avoid all this type of bias, you randomize the patients to groups. So we'll discuss each word, what do you mean by RCTs. So there are many things, many more published papers later on. 1948, streptomycin versus placebo in tuberculosis was published. 1951, penicillin in pneumococcal pneumonia was published. Okay, so these are a few words that I have highlighted. So which center, whether it is randomized or not, what is blinding, if there is any double dummy and active control. So we'll discuss each one of them. So what are the number of participating centers? Does it matter whether it is one center, many centers? How does it matter? Can any one of you unmute and answer? One of you unmute and answer. Participating center means study site. Suppose KEM is one site, AIIMS Delhi is one site, PGI Chandigarh is one site. So this type of multi-center study versus a single center, only KEM is a site. How it is different?
The geographical distribution of population that is coming to that hospital would differ. Like the demographics could differ there. The exposure which they are getting in that geographical area may be different from the others. So to eliminate those things, we can do a multicentric trial.
Okay, who is answering?
Shirish.
What's your name?
I'm Shirish.
Okay. Yes, correct. Yes. Yes, correct, Shirish. It is very good if you have more sites versus you have a lesser site. Why? Because as he said, different geographical regions will have different characteristics which can be taken into account when you are exposing them to a particular drug, particular intervention. Plus the amount of sample that you can get, sample size or number of patients that you get from each site will then increase, because now you can get more number of patients, which will strengthen your data. So all this you will get because your number of participating center or study site are more. So single center se multi-center is better. Okay. What is randomization? Can I just understand what is your understanding on randomization, so I can then build upon from there? So one of you answer. What do you understand by randomization? Okay. So I will explain. Actually, the word random in research means that every patient in your research has an equal chance of entering your study. So suppose I'm doing a study on diabetes mellitus and I have a new drug and I have a placebo. So any patient who satisfies my inclusion exclusion criteria, any patient is has an equal chance, has full chance of entering my study and entering into either the study drug or placebo. There is equal chance that he may enter either arms. That is randomized. So when you say this is a randomized control trial, what you are ensuring, what you're telling people is that it is done in a manner that if the patient has satisfied the inclusion exclusion criteria, that is the protocol will tell me that this diabetes patient should be like this when he enters the trial. So he should have sugars more than 300, HbA1c more than 7, his age should be between 18 to 65. So all these criteria the protocol will tell me. So based on these criteria, I will select a participant, and if when I've selected the participant, he has an equal chance of either entering into the study arm, that is the new drug arm, or the placebo arm. I have not influenced the choosing of patient into either arms or allocating them into either arms. That I have not influenced. The patient has not influenced. Nobody has influenced. There's no influence of anybody in there. Okay, so this is without bias. So that is called as randomization. So, so non-randomized research, or where there is no randomization, alternate assignment is done. So today one patient comes, he enters this arm. Tomorrow, next patient who comes will enter the other arm. So patient number 1 will go in study arm, patient number 2 placebo, patient number 3 again drug arm, patient number 4 placebo. So this is non-randomized. Why? Because at least the sequence of allocation you know. So you should not know the sequence of allocation also, or you should not, it should not be in your hand, this type of allocation. Because then what I will do as a researcher, what I will do, I will not put him on 3. I will not record his information at number 3. If I want him to receive the placebo, what I will do, I will record his information on 4th patient's line. So this type of things can happen. So that is a non-randomized research. Assignment based on birth date, medical record number is a very crude method of doing randomization. So how do you do then? How do you randomize then? So there is a way of randomization. What you can do is a computer generated sequence is generated, which is possible if it is possible. Sirish, I can send a link of a WhatsApp app on randomization, and you can just download that app. I'll send you the link. So it will tell you how do you randomize up. So suppose you have 30 patients, 15 are to receive drug and 15 are to receive placebo. Then it will tell you that number 1 gets a drug, number 2 also gets a drug, 3 will get a drug, 4 will get placebo, 5. So it will generate a sequence for you. Okay, and you have to follow that sequence. So, and it is a computer generated, so it is completely randomized. Means there is no control of anybody there to decide which patient gets what. Okay, so that is already been generated and it comes to you. Okay, and many times that sequence is not told also to the researcher. Okay, that sequence remains with somebody else, and as the patient satisfies the inclusion-exclusion criteria, that somebody else who is not a researcher will allocate him to a particular arm, and then he receives the medication. So that is a way of doing it. So generation of assignment is done using a computer-generated sequence, or in many statistical books, sometimes they behind pages there are some randomization numbers which can also be used. And concealment means researcher should not know what is that assignment. So suppose the 30 patient list is generated today, that list of who is receiving what should remain with somebody who is not looking at the outcome, because then you will favorably put the outcome for patients who are taking the drug versus will not favorable. So suppose I know that this patient is receiving placebo, what I will do is I will not record some adverse events which the patient is having. But if I don't know what the patient is receiving, I will record all adverse events because I don't know what the patient is receiving. Yeah. So there can be a bias which is, evaluator's bias, which is completely removed if you randomize them appropriately and conceal that allocation from the person who is recording the outcome or from the researcher who is the main researcher and who is recording the outcomes. So simple randomizations, block. There are various types of randomization which in a lecture on sampling can be done, maybe, where a more detailed explanation of these methods can be done. What you have to remember is avoid selection bias. So randomization avoids any type of selection bias. From the patient, from the investigator, there's no bias. Allocation concealment is there. So which group he will be allocated, either A or B, that is either drug or placebo. So that is concealed, we don't know. Okay. So that is on a snooze. Snooze is sequentially numbered opaque sealed envelopes. So that randomization code or what he is getting, what the 30 patients will receive will come to me as a packet, as an envelope. Okay. So as soon as the patient 1 enters, I have to take that 1 envelope, open the seal and look at what he will receive. Okay. So that can be done initially for the study. So somebody who is not, who is from outside or a study team member only can do it, but he should not share it with anybody else. Okay. He can just, in a sealed envelope, what patient number 1 will receive, what patient number 2 will receive, 3 will receive, and so on, up till patient number 30 will be written in the envelopes. So you have to tear the envelope and see. So it should be sequentially numbered. That is what patient number 1 will get, 2 will get. Sequentially numbered, opaque. तुम बाहर से नहीं देख सकते हो, ऐसा ही रखना है उसको, opaque रखना है, because then you can see something and you will see, अरे इसको placebo मिलने वाला है, इसको नहीं लेते. We will not randomize him. That shouldn't occur. So it should be opaque. Okay, it should be sealed envelope or containers. Central IVRS is also possible. That is what happens is you phone this is in pharmaceutical sponsored studies. So if it's a, say suppose Cipla sponsored study. So I phone the Cipla people and say, I have I have enrolled the first participant. What should he receive? What is his allocation? So then they have that IVRS system, and the phone they will tell me that you have to open the box number 1 for the patient, or whatever, box number 24 for this patient. So then I have to open that box, and whatever drug is there in that box, that has to be given to the patient. So this way also randomization you can do. Will you break randomization code? Would you want to break it anytime in between the study? Do I really want to know what this patient is receiving? Can such scenarios occur in a study? Can anybody unmute and answer?
Ma'am, there was a recent case in the coronavirus vaccine too, no? So like there was a patient who had developed complications. So for that you must understand now, because if she had been given placebo, then how could you tell that the vaccine was adverse? It was because you knew that the vaccine was given, so you could conclude कि हाँ vaccine से adverse effects है.
Okay, good. So one thing of where you have to break the randomization code is adverse events. Okay, especially when they are serious. Not at the time when they are not serious. When they are not serious, you treat the adverse event. It is not required to know. But when it is a serious adverse event where the patient's life, it is life threatening, then you would want to know whether the patient was receiving placebo, whether the patient was receiving drug, because your treatment line can also change depending upon what. So whenever it is the safety of the participant, the safety of the participants is highest. Okay, the data is second. Safety of the participant is highest. If you feel at any point of time you want to know because of the safety, because your management will change, if he was receiving placebo vis-a-vis he was receiving a study drug, then you break the randomization code, find out what the patient was receiving and treat him accordingly. Okay, so for the sake of patient, you can always break the randomization code. Okay, so confounders are equally distributed among different treatment groups if you know the confounding factor. Okay, like we discussed for smoke, lung cancer, smoking. So similarly, if you feel in a trial also, if there are any confounders, for example, in a diabetes trial, you feel BMI is very important, because BMI, very high BMI, the drugs may fail. So what you do is you keep equal BMIs in two groups. Okay, so you keep patients with very high BMI here also, in placebo also, and in drug group also. Moderate BMI in placebo group also, drug group also. Okay, so you divide this type of factors, confounding factors, in both groups equally. So control, what do you mean by control? So control is, so we'll discuss what is controlled. Okay, so instead of discussing what is uncontrolled, so that is, if you do not have any of this control, then it is uncontrolled. Controlled, when there is no treatment, this is very rare, no treatment control. That is, what happens is, again, we go back to the diabetes example. One group is getting drug, the other group is not getting anything. So this rarely occurs, like no treatment control group. Because it is not fair to keep anybody away from standard of care. It is unethical to not give a standard of care or withdraw somebody's standard of care in today's age and era, where a lot of advance in scientific medical science has already occurred. So no treatment control, it can only be possible maybe if it is a very mild condition. It is possible to withdraw the drug for 2 or 3 days. That time you can give. Placebo control, you can keep one patient on drug and other patient on placebo. Now again, placebo means an inert substance which does not have any effect. Now using a placebo control is also in a very highly ethical dilemma is there, because again you are withdrawing the standard of care and you're giving placebo which has no effect. So that again, it is not ethically correct to withdraw somebody's standard of care. So in diabetes, definitely it will not be possible, because no ethics committee will give you an approval also for such a study design. But when you can do this placebo control type of studies, when you are doing it as add-on design, that is, the standard of care is there for both the groups, and in one group you add this new drug, and the other group you add a placebo. Okay, so this type of design is allowed, where you give standard of care. So metformin is going on in both the groups. Okay, and metformin plus my new drug in my new drug arm, and in the placebo arm, metformin plus placebo. Okay, is it clear? So this type of study design can be done, and still it will be called placebo controlled study design, because you are comparing all the other conditions remain stable, and what you're controlling is only the placebo has changed here, and here there is new drug. So how much is the glycemic control now with the addition of this drug versus the placebo? or active control. This is the best design you can do. So you give your new drug to one group and you give metformin to other group and see how your drug fares, whether it fares as better as metformin, whether it is worse than metformin, whether it is better than metformin, whatever you get your study results. So that is also one of the ways of doing it. Now, certain psychiatric studies, placebo control is required because in psychiatric conditions, the placebo itself is known to have a very high response. So out of 100 patients, 30 patients or 40 patients will have a placebo response itself. So in those type of condition, you can give placebo in one arm and antipsychotic drugs in other arm. So this is allowed only for psychiatric conditions, where placebo itself is known to have a very high response in the patient. Yes, am I clear? You want to ask something here? Or the other slide, randomization? Or we go ahead?
Ma'am, can you please explain what active control is again?
Active control means standard of arm, standard of care. जो भी standard of care होगा उस disease का, वो आप एक arm में दोगे and the other arm will get your new drug. For example, in diabetes, standard of care today is metformin. Okay, that is a first line drug according to ADA guidelines. So you give metformin in one arm and the other arm you give your new drug and you test whether your new drug is as good as metformin. So what is your conclusion? My drug is worse than metformin, my drug is as good as metformin, or my drug is better than metformin. So any of these conclusions you can draw from this type of study designs, this type of control.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you.
Ma'am,
Yeah.
If we are giving a drug which is required for the patient in both and giving our drug in one and placebo in other, then how can we know that the effect is only due to our drug, or is it combined effect of the normal drug which is given and our drug? So how can we that?
Yes, that's a good question. So if you are giving a add-on new drug design, that is, I keep standard of care in both the arms and I add in one arm new drug and I add placebo in the other arm. So in this type of study design, standard of care has already caused your glycemic levels to come down some level. Okay, so in both the groups, you'll find that a dip of 100 mg in glucose has occurred. And below that, whatever decrease has occurred is probably because of addition of your drug. Now, sometimes what happens in pharmacology, we see there is a synergistic effect also. That is, if you add a drug, 1 + 1 may be more than 2. So that type of phenomenon is usually also seen in some. So sometimes drug interactions can cause more effect, can antagonize effect. It could be many other things which is possible inside the body. So this type of things, to prove or refute this type of things, you have to do multiple studies and prove that metformin ke se add kiya to bhi aisa effect aata hai. If you combine it with a glipizide, also the same effect is seen. If you combine it with rosiglitazone, also same type of thing is seen. So if you can show this, you know, this addition of this drug to the standard of care decreases the glycemic control to another 50 mg per dl, then that is also a good way of getting showing that your drug is effective, because there are a lot of people who are not controlled on metformin. So there is a need. There is a need of addition of other drugs also to come in the market, get added there where the glycemic control has not been achieved. Okay. Now getting a status that only this drug has an effect to show newly diagnosed diabetes mellitus, you can choose, in whom even if you give placebo for another 2-3 months, it will not matter, and you're checking their glucose very correctly, then you can do placebo controlled study, just placebo and your drug, and see what is the effect. But again, as I told, placebo, if you give alone, a lot of questions will be asked by ethics committee and other people. Yes, does that answer your question?
Can't we compare metformin with some other drug, like metformin given to the controls, like metformin given as a standard therapy to the controls, and to the cases new drugs to be given?
Yeah, that is active control. You can do that.
Yeah, that
is active control. You can do that, but sometimes what happens, people want to prove it against placebo because placebo does not have response. So you can always say, no, matlab mera drug itna kaam kiya. But if you fail na against metformin, metformin is a very strong drug. if you fail again, so you cannot show that. If you show that, if it is okay, if you can show metformin jitna mera drug kaam karta hai, then also you will likely, you will get marketing approvals. But if you show it is lesser than metformin, then nobody will give you an approval. So there are many other points or many other hurdles when one is developing a drug, new drugs when you're developing. So many things you have to take into account. Okay, that when you are as a researcher, but you should remain unbiased to the whatever is the outcome. You should just do the study with researchers' intent of knowing what is the truth. Coming to blinding, the study may be open blinded, that is, it is not blinded. So everybody knows what is the allocation. It could be single blinded, that is, only subject is blinded, that is, subject does not know what the treatment he is receiving. Double blind, that is, both the subject and the investigator does not know the allocation. Triple blind, the observer and the data analyst, that is, observer. Triple blind means, of course, the doctor and the patient are blind. Apart from that, other person may be blind, like a data analyst or a statistician who is analyzing your data. If that is, that person is also blind, then it is triple blind. So here I will like to ask, if everybody is blind, then who knows the allocation? For example, in double blind or in triple blind. Blinding means, what is the purpose of blinding? Somebody will explain that, and then maybe we'll ask, why do we blind?
To reduce bias.
Okay. Whose bias? Subject bias or investigator's bias?
Both. I mean, that is why double blinded will be better than single.
Can you give me an example of how subject bias can occur?
The placebo effect.
Okay. If I know that I am receiving metformin, then I'm likely to report an adverse effect. If I know that I'm receiving placebo, I will probably say, नहीं मेरा मुझे ठीक ही नहीं लग रहा है. I came for pain, but nothing is relieved now. I am sane. So this type of things is subject bias, because they know that a particular treatment is being given. They can report an effect that no effect, or they can report an improved effect, or they can report an adverse effect. So all this is because of bias, because they know what they are receiving. Investigator bias, can you give any example?
The investigator, the outcome of the group which is receiving the drug could be manipulated by the investigator. He could enhance the outcome than what it actually is.
Yes. Now, certain things the investigator cannot manipulate. For example, blood sugar. Agar blood sugar value laboratory mein isse karke aayi hai, then I cannot change that blood sugar value. No. So certain things I may not be able to change, but subjective jahan pe bhi hota hai. Jise quality of life of a patient, which is a subjective scale, or how much pain is there. That pain is shown on a vast scale. We show you in a second year practical also. On a vast scale, we ask the patient to say how much is the pain. So this type of scales, when they are there, or more subjective parameters are there, which is not laboratory driven, but you ask what is the perception about this. So whenever those type of parameters are there, investigator bias is likely to come into picture, because now he knows what you are receiving. So if he does not know what you are receiving, then he cannot manipulate the either ways. Okay. Or there can be, as we said, reporting of an adverse event could be there more if he knows that a drug patient is taking, and that adverse effect may not be reported at all in placebo group, because he knows कि इसको drug नहीं मिल रहा है तो ऐसा हो ही नहीं सकता. So this type of things which is there, which is investigator bias, will come only if the study is not double blinded. So the 3 words RCTs is randomized, controlled, double blind trial. You have understood the meaning. Okay, randomized is every person who has satisfied a selection criteria has an equal chance of entering either of the allocation, either the drug treatment and the placebo arm, or whichever arms the study has. Okay, 2 arms, 3 arms, whichever arms, however many arms the study has. So he has an equal chance of getting allocated to each of the arms. Okay. So it is controlled because you are having a control. Either it is a placebo control, Either it is active control, okay, or it is no treatment control, but you have a control group, people of another group who are controlled to the new drug group. Okay, so there is control arm is there. And not double blinded, we have explained that the investigator and the subject both are blinded to the study. Triple blind has an advantage that they will give you two groups to the statistician, but will not tell which group is what. Okay, so they'll give treatment A, this is the chart of patients, and treatment B, this is the chart of the patient. So even data analyst will not know which is a new drug arm and which is a placebo arm. Okay, so not literally like this, but okay, that other terms that you should know. We'll quickly go through all this. Parallel group, crossover, and factorial. Parallel group is you take the population that is selected, and then one group gets treatment A, the other groups get treatment B. This is what we were speaking on. Okay, and then they are evaluated. So they are parallel, they run parallelly. Okay, treatment A अगर allocate हुआ है तो उसको treatment B नहीं मिलता है. Similarly, treatment B does not get treatment A, and they run parallelly without touching each other. That is, they do not get interchanged during the therapy. So treatment A will just receive treatment A and then get evaluated. This is parallel group, and this is normally most of the studies, 90% studies are done in this manner. Factorial design is when you want to prove that somebody asked that if you want to prove the effect of two drugs when combined change, if you feel like that कि effect change होता है अगर दोनों को combine किया versus दोनों को combine नहीं किया. So what you can do is you can give treatment A to the one arm, treatment B to another arm, A plus B in the third arm, and placebo in the last arm, and see what is the effect in all these patients. Okay, so treatment A may improve 50%, treatment B may improve 50%, treatment A plus B may improve 75%, placebo may not show anything. So this type of study design you can plan. Crossover. So this is a patient, he starts with treatment A, first patient, then there is washout till 5 half-lives of the drug, so that completely the drug is washed out from the body. At least 5 half-lives this washout period should be. Then he will get treatment B. So this, you can see the yellow line, just follow the yellow line, treatment A, washout, treatment B. Here, the same person receives treatment B, and then his data is analyzed. So his data is analyzed here also, like what is the effect of treatment A, so he'll be recorded here also, and at the end of treatment B also he will be recorded here. Okay, his analysis will be done. Similarly, the patient who takes treatment B first, follow the blue line, purple line, and then washout ke baad he receives treatment A, and then again his data will be analyzed. So his data will be analyzed after completion of treatment B and after completion of treatment A. What is the advantage of crossover design? Here, same patient is receiving both the treatments. One of you unmute and answer. Parallel or crossover?
Selection bias can be eliminated.
Okay, because all patients will get both the yes. So selection bias to treatment A or versus treatment B. Yes. Anything else?
Inherent properties of the patient, like any
very good.
genetic association or all, can be eliminated here because both are
very good.
Getting.
Yes, yes, very good. Yes, here the patient himself is a control. His new drug also is control also. So the patient's other factors that determine the outcome, that may change the outcome. For example, is a genetic. There could be many other things which we don't know that may affect the outcome. So here what will happen is, because the same patient is giving you both the data, the patient inherent characteristics that will affect the outcome will not affect the outcome in this type of design. Okay, because here the same patient, whatever changes due to treatment A have occurred, the same patient will give you what treatment changes have occurred due to treatment B. So the inherent characteristics that patient has got that may affect the outcome will not affect the outcome in this type of design. Okay, what are the advantages of RCTs? If you see observational studies compared to that, control selection bias is not there. Confounding bias we have removed because it is all randomized. We don't know allocation kaisa hai. We don't know blinding hai, so we don't know There is no bias that way. Best evidence of causation. So you can this is the best way of telling that, yes, this is because of this. This drug has caused reduction of blood pressure. This drug has caused this adverse effect. So this type of association is highest, or cause and effect association is highest, or the best evidence with an RCT. Control selection bias, which was there with case control or cohort design, is not there in RCT, because all patients you take of diabetes, or all patients you take same. There is no control that way, and then you randomize them, and this random allocation is not known to you. The disadvantages are complex, expensive, costly, time consuming. Sometimes when you use placebo or no treatment control, then there will be ethical challenges to the study. Okay, but these are at the top of a pyramid of producing evidence. Highest degree of evidence can be produced with a clinical trial, with an RCT, randomized controlled double-blind clinical trials. Thank you. If you want to ask anything, you're welcome to ask.
Ma'am, could you please explain odds ratio once more? That part was not that clear.
Okay. Here we discussed that both exposure and outcome have already occurred. Okay. So I want to know what is the association of absenteeism from lecture to failure in the examination. So what I do is, you can take a pen and a pencil, maybe that will be good. So what odds ratio means is, what is the odds of failing in exam when you are absent from the lecture, as compared to what are the odds of passing in the exam when you are absent in the lecture. That is the odds. Okay, that is a broad ratio. So what is the odds of failing in the exam when you are absent in the lecture versus what is the odds of passing in the exam when you are absent in the lecture? So how will you calculate the odds of failing in the exam when you are absent? So that is A upon C. A upon C. This ratio will tell you whether what is the odds of failing in the exam when you are absent from the lecture versus you are here present. So A upon C. What is the general odds of passing the exam when you are absent? So that is B upon D. If you do this A upon C divided by B upon D and you reverse the ratio, you get AD upon BC. So you get this, you derive this when you divide this ratio with this ratio.
Yes, ma'am.
Have you understood?
Yes, ma'am. Thank you.
Yeah. Anybody else?
Ma'am, I had a doubt. Ma'am, regarding like, ma'am, basically in UG, the most common study design which we adopt is a cross-sectional study design, because that is the most convenient study design. But the main problem that occurs in it is sampling, and like, as you said, if we do a proper sampling with a good sampling method, then only the evidence is best. So,
right,
what could be the way how the sampling could be improved? Because sending online questionnaires and all becomes very, like, the sampling is not very good in that. So how can that be improved?
I agree with you. But what you can do is, next time, Sirish, you can plan a lecture on sampling, because I didn't see in the schedule. It's a lecture on actually by itself. You can have a lecture on sampling and sample size maybe. At your level, they can just come up and give some examples of how cross-sectional studies we can do a sampling. There are many methods by which you can do it, and maybe see in the end if you can manage to keep one. I can only explain. See how you can incorporate it, or maybe next time you can keep. To answer to your question broadly is, sampling should be done in a randomized manner. The sampling here, when you're doing for a cross-sectional, because there are no allocation to arms, sampling here will only mean that what is the chance of a patient, that is every patient has an equal chance of entering your study. Okay, that is sampling for, or random sampling for a cross-sectional study, because there are no two groups there. So, so any patient who has complied your inclusion-exclusion criteria should have an equal chance of entering into your study. So you should have an access to where the data is generated. Maybe the place where OPD records are kept, or patients who are coming to OPD, kahin to record hota hoga na. So that record you have to keep, and there apply your computer generated sequence number and select the patients randomly. If you can do this, then you can go to the place and identify those patients with that. So suppose you've selected number 33, 86, 85, whatever. So then you have to identify that person in the OPD and then go to him and take his data. Okay, so that way it is possible to do. It is possible to do, but it takes a lot of efforts. But you can write in your published paper that this is a randomly done, random sampling was done, and the quality of paper increases considerably if you can randomly sample the such studies.
Okay, ma'am. And also, like, which type of study design would you recommend would be best to pursue in, like, during UGs? Because UGs don't really prefer going into and people also say like clinical studies नहीं कर सकते UG में because they are not allowed to do. So क्या कर सकते हैं exactly UG में?
That's a very broad question, because that will depend upon what is your research question. So if you say I want to do prevalence type of studies, then automatically cross-sectional designs will become your design of choice. But if you can go and do a little more study and find out ki kuch exposure hai, like for example, if you can do a small case control studies also, no, it will be very much worthy, because then at least some amount of greater evidence you are producing, because there's some amount of causal, at least you'll get odds ratio, and it will at least tell you ki kitna times the risk is higher in patients who have had the exposure. So some studies where you can see, where you have seen or your professors speak, you know, this type I've seen, but there are no studies. So that can be taken up as a academic study and done. That will be good.
But can we do clinical? Can we participate in clinical trials as well with the department?
Okay, so you need a degree. Basically, ethics committee looks at what is the role of that person in the study. So each person you have to write what is the role of that person. So if you see if you say for data management or for recording the data in the CRF, or from CRF to eCRF, ऐसे कुछ जो you cannot take consent of the patient, because that requires you have to have UG degree. So what level you can participate? Okay, in data management, or you can observe the informed consent being taken. So other things which you can do, you can look at how random sequences are generated, or how they're done actually when it is done in the clinical trial setting. So if you can request somebody who are, you know, active, who take up clinical trials, and request them to be made a part of study, ethics committee will only look at कि तुम क्या कर रहे हो उसमें, and you will not allow you to take informed consent. But other things you can obviously do, and maybe not examine the patient, but other things like recording the data, etc. You can be of lot of help.
Thank you.
Ma'am. Hello, ma'am.
Yes,
ma'am, I wanted to ask whether an uncontrolled analytical study is possible.
No, analytical study का मतलब ही है कि एनालिसिस पे जा रहा है, कुछ कॉज इफेक्ट रिलेशनशिप एस्टैब्लिश हो रहा है. When you say the moment that cause effect relationship is going to be established, you need to have a control. Otherwise, how will you know that your drug is faring better, or your thing is faring better, or your intervention is faring better? So you need to have some control. So even in cross-sectional studies, when we do not have any control, the same population group who is severe versus who is mild, are there any differences in characteristics? ऐसा करते हैं, but that evidence there generated is very poor, because you are doing it in a very snapshot of time. Because tomorrow that person who has that characteristics may develop severe, but you have not followed that patient to see whether he is severe or not. So that type of thing can occur. But
Ma'am, like if we consider type of study, like we took patients from who are having a particular disease, and then we follow them up in time, not like case control study, whatever the risk factors, but we follow them up in time. So what will be the control for such type of study?
Okay, for longitudinal studies now, it depends upon what is the objective of the study. What is your research question? So if you are following the patient, for what? You should have some thing in mind. What is the purpose of doing this study? What are you going to establish by following him up? Are you going to see, so today the patient was started on a drug, are you going to see what is the changes that takes place in 6 months time, and every month you are following up that patient? Then that is a very useful data, because that will tell you whether that particular patient, how he has fared in the last 6 months. So how much you can calculate this way also, okay, how much times he was controlled with this drug when he was given it for 6 months versus the other drugs. You can compare between drugs. So this type of data is more useful rather than just at one point of time.
In longitudinal studies, it is possible that a control is not taken.
It is, I will say it is possible, Sizada, if you have a straight research question in mind, like how I said, you want to compare between interventions, you want to compare between certain genetic types and see how they, what is their prognosis, whether they are more controlled if they are a particular genetic type versus they are not, etc. If you're doing this type of study, then it has more value than a cross-section study. And it will not still generate a relative risk or an odds ratio, which are more powerful, but it will definitely give you a rich data.
Okay. Thank you, ma'am.
Yes. Are we done? You can write to me. I'll keep my email ID is there with Sirish. So if you have any problem, if you want to ask, you want to apply to ethics committee, etc., any problems, you can ask me. Yes.
Okay, ma'am.
Yeah. So so we say bye now.
Okay, ma'am. Thanks a lot.
Okay. Thanks a lot for all of you for patient hearing, and it was a very interactive audience. Actually, I like UG students more than the other group who many times sleep during lectures. So the attention and the interaction was great. So thank you.
Okay, ma'am. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am.